According to the Greco-Romans, the telos of life is eudaimonia. You want the kind of life that you get to the end of it, you look back and you say, well, that was not wasted time. Thank you. Thanks for coming. It always amazes me when there's lots of people coming to one of my talks, so I'm very grateful. So what I want to talk to you about today is, as the title says, Beyond Stoicism. I've been writing about Stoicism and actually trying my best to practice the philosophy of Stoicism for a number of years now. But there are other philosophies in the world, and particularly in the Greco-Roman worlds, and we can learn from pretty much all of them. So what I'd like to do today is to give you a very brief kind of sampler of a number of Greco-Roman philosophies that appeared and evolved about the same time as Stoicism, so mostly during the Hellenistic period. I will not have time enough to get into details into any of them. So in fact, what I decided to do is to pick just one idea from each one of them, really to kind of give you a sampler, a taste of it. And then hopefully you will like it enough that you can go into it on your own, and of course buying the book, but that's irrelevant. That's irrelevant. Don't worry about that. So between the classical, Hellenistic, and late Roman periods, lots of philosophers were active in the Greco-Roman world, in the Mediterranean world. You can see just a few of the names there. And it's sometimes very difficult to make sense of it. A lot of books or videos and so on that go through the Greco-Roman philosophies tend to do it chronologically. So you start with the pre-Socratics in the 6th century BC and you end up with the Neoplatonists in the 5th century. That's a really bad idea, because then you get the impression that these things don't make, that there's no rhyme or reason. It's like, oh, there's this guy and then this other guy and then this other guy. And it's like, what? Mostly they're guys, although we'll see there are exceptions. Instead, what we, and by we, I'm not referring to myself as the Pope. I co-wrote the book with two friends of mine, Greg Lopez and Meredith Kuntz. We decided instead on a different approach, a little bit more conceptual, in order to try to make sense of what was going on and kind of the map, the conceptual maps that these people put into place. So we decided to use a metaphor of navigating through 3 different ports or 3 different areas that in our mind correspond to the 3 different ways in which you can do Greco-Roman philosophy. The port of pleasure, the port of character or virtue, and the port of doubt. And so now we're going to be sampling each one of the major philosophies that belong to each port. Before we get into the individual philosophies, it's important to keep in mind 2 terms that are important in Greco-Roman philosophy: telos and eudaimonia. Telos, it means goal. So if you have a goal, if you have an objective, then you have a telos. Okay. My telos today is to present to you a sampler of the Greco-Roman philosophies, for instance. Eudaimonia means a life worth living. Sometimes the word is translated as happiness, but that's a little too wishy-washy. Sometimes it's translated as flourishing, but that actually tends to favor one particular approach to the good life. My favorite translation is the life worth living. According to the Greco-Romans, the telos of life is eudaimonia. Okay? You want the kind of life that you get to the end of it, you look back and you say, well, that was not wasted time. Okay? Turns out they were right, by the way. There is very good empirical evidence from modern psychology that that's exactly what people want, apparently. All right. So first port, pleasure. There are 2 major philosophies here. One was established by Aristotle of Cyrene. Cyrene was in northern Africa, in modern-day Libya. And so they're called the Cyrenaics from that location. And the other one you might be familiar with, Epicurus of Samos. So one thing about the Cyrenaics, therefore, and one thing about the Epicureans, as I said. The Cyrenaics were really the original sex, drugs, and rock and roll of ancient philosophy. It was clearly a hedonistic, that is pleasure-oriented philosophy. They divided pleasures into physical and mental. And then within each category, the pleasure could be present, right? You're experiencing it right now, or it can be past. It's your memory of a pleasure. Or it could be in the future, your expectation of a pleasure. And unlike other schools, the Cyrenaics didn't beat around the bushes. They said the only important thing is physical present. That's it. All the other ones don't really matter. Good food, good wine, good company, good sex, good whatever, so long as it's physical and now. Now, why? Why physical? Because they argued that physical pleasures are much more intense than mental pleasures. Right? So it's like, then why would you want to go for the least interesting one or the least powerful one? And also, similarly, they argue that memories or anticipations of past or future pleasures are also less intense than now. Right? So think about eating a gelato now, or remembering eating a gelato yesterday, or anticipating eating a gelato this afternoon. It's not the same thing, right? You want it here, you want it now. That said, one could say, but that's not a philosophy. That's what most people do, no matter what, right? Most people are natural Cyrenaics. It becomes a philosophy because they added that you need to do that with virtue, and particularly one virtue, temperance. You need to own your pleasures, not the other way around. If you allow your pleasures to control you, then you're getting into trouble, all sorts of troubles. And they actually spelled out the kinds of troubles you get into. Some of those troubles we would today call addictions or self-destructive behaviors and things like that. So, pleasure, physical now, but with moderation. Yeah. Second idea, the Epicureans. Out of all the facts, the things that the Epicureans have said, I'm going to pick one interesting concept. They also came up with a classification, this time of desires, human desires. They thought that some of our desires are natural and necessary. Some of them are natural but unnecessary. Some of them are both unnatural and unnecessary. And there's no such a thing as the fourth category that you would imagine. No desire can possibly be unnatural and necessary, because if it's unnatural, then you don't need it. That's their reason. Now, what are they talking about? Natural and necessary desires are the kinds of things that we would say today your biology impels you to do. You need shelter, you need food, you need water, you need clothes, you need also friendship, conversation, because you're human beings. You don't survive you don't live just by eating and drinking. You also need social interactions, you need intellectual stimulation, etc., etc. Well, those are natural and necessary, so those are the ones you should be focusing on. The trouble for most people starts when they go from the natural necessary to the natural unnecessary. These are essentially the same pleasures, but bigger. Right? So now I don't want just a house, I want a fancy villa in Tuscany. I don't want just a meal, I want a gourmet meal. I don't want just water, I need expensive wine. I don't want just the clothes, but expensive clothes. I don't want just a few friends, I want 1,000 friends on Facebook, and et cetera, right? Those are unnecessary, meaning that you don't really need them at the end of the day to live a good life. So what the Epicureans suggested was, go for them if they're easy. But as soon as they become trouble, and they will, stop. Go back down to the necessary, right? It takes time and effort to get a villa in Tuscany. And so that may not be worth your headaches. That's the basic idea. Now, what about unnatural and unnecessary? Those are things like fame and wealth. Those are troubled periods. Stay away. Why are they troubled? Troubled because they're boundless. Once you start getting into that thing, there is no stopping point. If you're hungry, you'll stop because you eat. And then at some point you'll be satisfied. If you're thirsty, you'll drink, you stop because you will be satisfied. But if you want fame and wealth, there is no bound, there is no end to it, and therefore there is also no end to your troubles. The second part is a little larger. There are more philosophies that you can navigate through. It's the part of character or virtue. Virtue is just a behavioral disposition of character, so we're talking about the same thing. Here you find people like Aristotle, Hipparchia of Menoneia, one of the few women from ancient philosophy who was a cynic, Epictetus, who was a Stoic, and Plato. All right, for instance, Aristotle. Aristotle thought that there are fundamentally four kinds of people, broadly speaking. At the two extremes, there are the occasional, very occasional, virtuous person. That's the person who always does the right thing. Right? No matter what the circumstances, no matter what the cost, they always do the right thing. Sure, once in a while you'll find them, but not very popular, not very common. At the opposite extreme, unfortunately, you find a good number of people who are fundamentally vicious. They tend to do the wrong thing because they're narcissists, self-involved, They become presidents of the United States. That sort of stuff. The other two are the more interesting ones because most of us fall into one of the two intermediate categories. Let's start with the one to the left. That's an encratic person. Encrasia means that you have power, you have willpower. So an encratic person is somebody who is not really virtuous because it takes effort for that person to actually do the right thing, but they'll do it. They'll force themselves. It will take effort, it will take energy, but they will do it. The acratic person, on the other hand, acrasia means lack of will, okay, or weakness of the will. So that's the person that knows what the right thing to do is. They just can't bring themselves to do it. So the contrast, for instance, might be between a couch potato and somebody who actually decides to get up at the couch and go to the gym. Right? I am one of those people, the encratic person. Right? So I don't like going to the gym. It takes me effort and willpower and all that sort of. But I do it because it's good for me, fine. The acratic person, on the other hand, comes up with all sorts of rationalizations and reasons for why it's actually better to just stay put and eat potato chips. One of the problems is that at the very minimum, we want to move from being acratic to being encratic. And that takes effort. And according to Aristotle, you do that the same way in which you get to Carnegie Hall in New York City. Not literally, but performing. Right? So the idea, if you're in the States, it will tell you, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Right? So that was the idea that Aristotle had. You practice. So your problem is that you are acratic about going to the gym. Call a buddy, help, get some help, somebody who pushes you, and then you'll start doing it once, and then the second time, and then a third time, and then after a while, it almost becomes pleasurable. I can tell you, after decades, it's almost pleasurable. So that's how you become essentially a better person, according to Aristotle. It's just practice. You don't have to be perfect. You have to be getting off the couch. The Stoics.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.